The merchant, a cruel and formidable man, hails from a family with a long history of slavery. The merchant is a cruel man whose family has a deep history of selling people into slavery. While he isn't the most powerful one in his family, he is still formidable due to his ability to generate revenue and his skills in creating lower-tier formations. Unlike his older brother, he wasn't a highly skilled fighter, but due to his brother's reputation, protection and connections, he was able to take over the city and become the biggest frog in a small pond, with no one within a close distance matching his level of power. With no one to challenge his dominance, he hadn't had a need to be prepared for any surprise attacks for a long time. Due to that, he was found completely unprepared for the attack coming out of nowhere from our surprise protagonist. With a sword run through him, the merchant felt an intense pain jolted through him, and suddenly he felt his source energy being drawn out of him. While he was injured, he was surprisingly lucky that the sword only nicked a part of his source core. With his source core being damaged, he found his power instantly drop from level 3 mid-tier to level 3 primary. Feeling his core almost being destroyed, the merchant immediately reacts and creates a wind blast that separates himself from his attacker. With the force from that blast moving him away from his attacker, the merchant feels safer and starts to assess the situation. He looks at the person who attacked him and is truly startled. In front of him is one of the slaves he's owned for years. With only one eye, one arm, countless scars, and a malnourished body, you would think that he wouldn't have the strength to even pick up the sword he is holding. But when you look at the gaze he gives off, and the presence that he holds, you can't help but shudder at the intensity that they both have. The merchant can't process what is happening. After all his talk about not letting your guard down until you have completed your task, he found himself having come up short. Trying to make sense of what is going on, not only is the merchant confused, Robert Luigi, Robert's father Rob, all of the guards in the area and the other overseers found themselves also unable to handle the new development. The slave, known as Weakness, has always been an absent-minded good-for-nothing ever since he was brought to the city 12 years ago. Yet here he stands right in front of them with his back and head held high, as if to not let anyone look down on him. While the rest are trying to figure out what is going on, the slave called Weakness is angry with himself. Weakness. So many years of pain, humiliation, torture, and planning down the drain, and I wasn't even able to destroy that piece of shit source core. Fuck. I truly thought with his mind on trying to enslave Daisuke, I would have been able to gut that fucker by channeling the lighting tribulation through my body and sword and bring an end to this nightmare. But when I moved through the void and momentarily opened it up briefly to surprise attack him, I wasn't able to hide the absence of space, and it alerted him, so I ended up missing my mark. After figuring out his mistake, Weakness changed gears and focused on Plan B. He starts running towards the merchant and begins drawing in massive amounts of source energy from his surroundings to strengthen both his body and his spirit. As soon as Weakness started making his way towards the merchant, everyone in the area was jolted from their confusion, and the only thought on most of their minds was to protect their master. The first one to move was the merchant. While he was still scared by Weakness's unknown ability, he swiftly started gathering his source energy and changed it to wind so he could create wind blades with peak level 2 amounts of power in each one. Almost at the same time, Robert drew out his spirit halberd, wrapped it in wind, and with his way of the body's source energy being at peak level 2, with one step he rushed forward and appeared behind Weakness to cut him in half. With both attacks bearing down on him, Weakness didn't even spare a quick glance. In the next moment, he disappeared. With that happening, Robert found himself in the path of multiple peak level 2 wind blades quickly descending upon him. While he had the body of peak level 2, he didn't train his body as well as Daisuke had, so he wasn't able to react fast enough to dodge those attacks. Due to the merchant being surprised, he didn't have enough time to control his fastest attack, so he could only helplessly watch as Robert was deeply wounded by his own attack, and he felt his heart rip out of his body as he saw blood spill out from him. In that moment, The merchant and Robert's father, Rob, were both unsettled by what just happened. They rushed to his side and started calling out to him as he fell unconscious from the heavy wounds. With their attention fully focused on Robert, they didn't see coming weakness appearing once again, but this time he was behind one of the guards, and the moment he appeared, his sword was already flying towards the vitals of the man with him, quietly saying to himself, "Weakness 2." With a quick stab, the guard found his heart skewered by Weakness's black-bladed Shirasaya katana with a silver handle and sheath. Coughing up blood, a look of surprise was plastered onto the guard's face. "Behind him," Weakness said in a low voice. "Weakness. All these years I watched as you pieces of shit committed all sorts of unforgivable sins with no idea that one day I would pass judgment on you. Well, the day has come, and just know that because your crimes were on the low side, I grant you mercy by killing you quickly, but know that the worst of your kind won't have an easy death, I can promise you that." With a quick pull, he retracts his blade from the man's back, and as the body drops to the floor, he disappears once again, when the merchant shoots more wind blades at Weakness's former position. This situation occurs several more times, as the merchant has the fastest attacks in the city, but he isn't able to put a scratch on his enemy. With the situation not changing for the better, the merchant orders his guards to group up and watch each other's backs. The merchant is starting to slowly panic. When he first found out about Daisuke's power, he was startled due to never using his source sense technique to check out the slaves. So to save face, he acted as if he knew the whole time to not embarrass himself in front of Robert and Lu Ji. After that, he made sure to have a full grasp on what was going on in his city to not be caught off guard again. But all his planning fell short when the slave Weakness stabbed him in the back, almost destroying his cultivation in one go. Seeing himself and his men helpless in the face of this attack, the merchant was trying to find a way to end this quickly. But he knew nothing about Weakness, so he couldn't formulate a plan to deal with him and his disappearing act. Suddenly he heard Lu Ji yell, "Lu Ji, stop, you son of a bitch, or I'll cut this worthless slave's throat right now." The merchant turns towards Lu Ji and sees her holding the unconscious Daisuke by the hair with the dagger she had used to stab him previously held against his throat. Weakness stopped moving for a moment with his back to Lu Ji and his sword touching the back of one of the guards. Lu Ji was happy to see her scheme paid off. Even if she was scared by how well Weakness hid his true self, she knew most people wouldn't be able to throw away the person who cared for them for so many years. The merchant, seeing that Weakness was finally staying in one place, he sent more wind blades at him while the guard is moving away as fast as he can. Expecting Weakness to vanish just like he did before, the merchant started looking around to see where he would appear next. But instead, the wind blades left deep cuts on Weakness's body, and instead of screaming or even letting any noise, Weakness just closed his eye and stayed motionlessly on the spot. Believing that she had won, Lu Ji starts laughing at both Daisuke and Weakness. "Lu Ji, even though you were able to trick us with your act, you were still caught because of your inferior mind and being unable to throw away those who can bring you down. I promise you that Master and I will kill you miserably." While being hit constantly by wind blades, Weakness didn't do anything besides protect his vitals with his special ability and let his spirit and body absorb all of the source energy he stole from the people he killed. Seeing that his attacks were putting an end to Weakness, the merchant decided to go all out and use his strongest attack that he can pull off with his source core being permanently damaged. He creates a formation seal in his hand with the ancient Greek symbol for cut, temnine, to increase the cutting power in his seal, and then he gathers as much source energy he can handle and transforms it into wind. By fusing them both together, he brings his power up to another level to once and for all finish off Weakness with this attack, as this one was even stronger than the attack used on Daisuke. Silently standing there, Weakness shows no signs of concern for what is happening around him. His mind is moving as fast as possible to reach his goal. At level 1, a person is training to feel the source energy inside of them and materialize it into an item. The duration of it lasting is the usual indicator to show what realm they have reached. So when there is no energy loss in using it, that is when they have reached the pinnacle of level 1 and are ready to start approaching for level 2. At that very moment, Weakness had assimilated enough of the energy he stole and had a genius grasp of how to properly manipulate level 1 spirit source energy that he had already reached level 1 pinnacle within those few minutes of fighting. But he was anything but done. At the same time, he was pressuring his muscles with source energy to strengthen his body as fast as possible, and he quickly caused all the muscles in his body to rip apart and heal over and over again. Usually, it would be impossible for someone to use two different cultivation techniques at the same time, especially when they are from two different paths, but Weakness' special ability helps him do the impossible. As both were standing still, no one else was willing to be anywhere near them for fear of the merchant's attack and not wanting to be near Weakness when it hits him. So people were running once again away from the area. The merchant opened his hands outward, and from them came a thin line of space that was cutting everything in its path. This was his level 3 primary wind formation technique, Void Cutter, with the power to cut a building in half. With it inching towards his face, Weakness showed no signs of moving as he suddenly opened his eye, and a bolt of lightning struck him once again from the sky as even bigger and darker clouds had gathered overhead than before. Seeing the similarity of this scene to Weakness's ambush from before, Lu Ji realized that Weakness was currently in the exact spot and position he was in when he stabbed the merchant in the back and had called lightning down the first time. She didn't know why this was important, but she felt like it was something critical. With the lightning being faster than the wind, Weakness's body was energized by the familiar feeling of his whole existence being supercharged with a battery of infinite power. The reason Weakness didn't move from that spot was because he knew they would use Daisuke against him at some point, so he had been keeping an eye on him the whole time. So when Lu Ji was reaching for Daisuke's head, Weakness targeted the guard that was at that exact spot at the time. Since his first plan to kill the merchant with a surprise attack failed, he was going with plan B to generate enough power by stealing it from the guard's cause and breaking through in the exact same spot he had the first time, because doing it at the same spot makes that place the cultivator's own holy land, greatly benefiting their abilities. With the power from his new holy land, his new level 2 way of the spirit and way of the body powers, and his absorbed energy from the lightning tribulation, he had enough energy to reach level 2 upper pinnacle, but his body and spirit were already drained and worn out from the quick and in continuous fashion breakthroughs, so he knew he couldn't take the merchant's attack head-on. The Windblade line split Weakness in half, and his body fell apart from each other. And when Lu Ji started to giggle to herself that Weakness was dead, the image of Weakness faded away, as his after-image was what was split in half. The merchant was furious that he can't kill a tiny slave like Weakness, so he quickly yells at Lu Ji, "The merchant killed Daisuke!" Lu Ji momentarily is startled that her plan fell through, but she quickly stabs her dagger directly at Daisuke's throat. But in the moment before her dagger penetrates his throat, Daisuke disappears. Surprised that now both Weakness and Daisuke are gone, everyone is searching around and scared that they are next. After a few seconds, Weakness reappears near Lu Ji and tries to stab her in the stomach. Since Lu Ji isn't as powerful as Daisuke, she doesn't have the endurance to keep her way of the body power fully up always, or drive her way of the spirit power to keep her source clothes on defense mode all the time. So Weakness finally had the chance to harm the woman he hates most in this world. However, due to her still being more powerful than him in both body and spirit, he couldn't appear right next to her like the merchant earlier, since her guard isn't down. After appearing again, Weakness is moving at almost the same speed as he was before, with his sword aiming to cause major damage. But unlike the people Weakness has killed before, Lu Ji had enough time to avoid Weakness's weapon. With her spirit dagger materializing in her open hand, Lu Ji was able to make sure that the blade never touched her. However, while her attention was on the sword, Lu Ji didn't have the leeway to notice anything else, such as Weakness's flying kick aiming straight for her stomach. With Weakness's kick bouncing off the flesh of Lu Ji, everyone there thought that Weakness just wasn't strong enough without the sword to do any damage. But only Weakness knew how vicious and cruel his attack really was. After disappearing again to avoid Luzi's counterattack, Weakness appeared next to the hunting case that contained his genitals, and once he placed his hand on it, the whole thing disappeared. After gaining the case, Weakness was finally able to release the tension from his body, and in that moment of relaxation, he almost passed out right there and then, but he held on through sheer willpower, while also almost dropping to his knees. The merchant saw that Weakness didn't have the same intimidation air around him, and all you could see on his face was pure exhaustion. So the merchant finally regained his confidence and swagger and ordered the guards to surround him. While this was happening, Weakness was just standing there, letting every moment be a time to gain as much energy as possible. Completely surrounded, Weakness doesn't show a care in the world. He just slowly and deeply breathes in and out. The merchant and Luzi are practically beside themselves. As people who know that information is the most important part of fighting, negotiating, and life itself, they feel naked and blind dealing with a foe they don't know. While racking their brains, Luzi finally comes up with something and says, "Luzi, Weakness, surrender yourself and Daisuke or face the consequences." Weakness? Oh, what type of consequences would that be? With his eye looking at Luzi, she is startled at the intensity that is coming off his body once again. "Luzi, you and your little friend might be able to get away today, but what about all those other slaves? Will you be able to live with the guilt of abandoning all of those slaves to a painful and horrifying death?"